Good afternoon. We're going to reconvene the Wild Horse and Burro Advisory Board's meeting. And this portion of the meeting is actually set aside for the board itself to go through express its concerns and make comments. We're also going to be moving along to talk a little bit about our working groups that we have, basically subcommittees, if you will, involving different parts of the program. Perhaps maybe we can start with the BLM-formed working groups. And I think my biggest concern there is maybe repopulating current members on those working groups. And these basically the working groups that are formed by the BLM are not necessarily ongoing groups and working continuously, but are at times asked by the BLM to enter in and make comment on things that are pertain to the comprehensive animal welfare program is the first one. So with that, the current people on that board or on that working group are myself, Tim Harvey, and Dr. Bray, who is now off the board. I think Dr. McDonald expressed desire to be on that particular group. So generally, we need 3 people on each of these groups. Probably 4 is, especially for the BLM group, 4 is plenty. So anybody else would have a desire to be on that particular working group? If not, then we'll put forth that we would ask that Dr. McDonald be the replacement for Dr. Bray on that comprehensive animal welfare program working group. The next one is the increasing adoptions working group, and currently, we need to even change the BLM's lead on that. It was Sally Spencer. We'll need to. Would Deborah be that person? Who will we use for our?
She may be. She's only on a detail away from our program temporarily.
So Sally may.
Yes.
Still be able to. Okay. The other members from the board would be Julie Gleason and June. So obviously Julie would need to be replaced. Do we have someone who would like to jump into increasing adoptions working group?
If one of the new members doesn't want to do it, I'd be interested in. Fred?
Okay, Fred was interested, and we're going to put John on it.
Yep.
Tim, you got a pretty good workload going.
No, I'm just saying if nobody else wanted to step up.
Okay.
But if we need 3 members, I would.
Okay, well, let's, since John is involved with the Heritage Foundation and Fred expressed a desire for that, we'll put those 2 on there.
What are we going to be on?
You just volunteered.
Don't you ask any questions, John.
Okay.
I'll just say you'll go.
Okay, from that, we'll go to the Eco Sanctuary Working Group. Zach is the lead for that, and we have Tim Harvey and Callie on that particular group. I don't know if we need to add to it or not.
If there's anyone else that would like to serve on that, I would be happy to just focus on the other 2 that I'm on so that I can kind of focus, but I'll stay there if others are not interested.
Any interest?
Okay.
Any interest?
Oh, actually, was that one that Fred, ecotourism?
Expressed an interest to me personally for the comments.
Yeah, comments.
Be that Tim and I are on that currently, and he said he would like to be involved.
Okay, I think I can't remember. There was like 3 of them he said he would do.
I just want to talk to them.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay, so then we are supposing that Fred wants to perhaps do that.
If I could nudge anybody. Rick, is that something you'd be interested in helping us out with?
Which one?
The Eco Sanctuary. I think having a wildlife guy on that would be it would really be nice to have your input if I can nudge in that direction. I mean, right now, as a subcommittee, it isn't terribly active. It won't demand a huge amount of time, but I think your area of expertise really would be an incredible asset to a subcommittee dealing with helping to advise on any kind of eco-sanctuary issues.
Okay.
All right? How was that,
So
Boyd?
Rick would be the third one. Okay, here's what I'm proposing. We have two groups that are formed by the, working groups formed by the board itself. And we've duplicated, so we have two basically that are working with maybe we only have one with ecotourism. I'm thinking we could populate both of those working groups, one of the BLM's group and one of the board's group, with the same people perhaps, because a lot of the same issues will.
Right, the ecotourism one. Oh, it's in tab 8. You're talking about the ecotourism and the eco-sanctuary one, you mean?
Correct.
Yeah.
And so we would have Tim, Fred, and Rick.
The group could wear two hats, because it's really the same issue. And just one is formed by us and one by the BLM.
There is and I agree, and I was one of those that was saying we should be combined, but I guess as I just now hit me, the real difference in them is back at the beginning when we were talking about this ecotourism, it was not about the eco-sanctuaries. It was about touring of current HMAs and developing the tourism through those. So that is somewhat different.
They're somewhat different, but I think a lot of the same issues come
Right.
up, and perhaps we can use the same people
Right.
working on both of those sets of issues.
That makes a lot of sense. It's a place where I think there's going to be some redundancy in priorities and that kind of thing that would be really valuable to not have to, educate two groups of separate groups of people. I think one group would be really good with that. So I'm cool. I'm down
So
with that.
if the BLM would accept that recommendation, I think that's what we'd like to do with those two working groups, one a BLM group and one an advisory board group.
That makes sense to combine them.
Okay. Let's go back to the advisory board groups. I'm going to jump resources for just a minute and talk
Boyd,
about.
may I ask a question? Would this be a BLM-formed working group then?
No,
or-
no, no, no. I'm just saying that we have two separate working groups, and let's populate both those. One's from the BLM, one's from the board.
Right.
And we'll populate both of those working groups with the same people. even
Oh,
though
but they'll stay two separate work, okay.
I think that's
yes,
probably,
got it.
since it's not, we're not pretending to say what kind of a group you should.
Okay, I thought you were going to combine them. I misunderstood.
No, we're just going to populate with the same
Thank you.
people. Okay, the next one I'd like to bring up is a board group, establish criteria for evaluation of HMA's sustainability of herd reintroduction. And this is the one that actually was duplicative of one further down the list about, we just call it herd area repopulation. I think it would be, again, wise, those are two we should probably just combine,
Yeah. That makes sense to make that a single group.
a single group. And we actually have no members even assigned to the first one of those two. So the second one has Tim June Suing and Robert Bray, which is off. So who would have interest in serving as a third person on that herd area repopulation working group?
Was that one that Fred wanted to do?
I think you're putting him on too many groups.
No, I've only got him on one so far. But he said three. I can't remember what they were.
I think it was financial was his third group.
Okay, might have been.
I think he wanted comments and financial, I think. And we can shuffle stuff around, but
Okay.
that's, we can, and we tend to kind of sit on each other's working groups anyway, so.
Yeah. Dr. McDonald, could I boot you in that direction, maybe? Is it something that interests you? I'd love the opportunity to work with you. That's
I
fine.
just don't want to take on too much with
Okay.
my
Other
being new.
responsibility, yeah.
Yeah.
That's how you get over being new.
Yeah.
All right.
You're not new now.
Oh, now, careful, don't be too easy to get along with.
It's kind of like the Army, if you volunteer for stuff and don't know it,
And I would like to say that, all of these working groups, they're not necessarily active at all times.
No.
But as the issues come up, we tend to, they become active, consult with one another, and hopefully promote a recommendation that would go toward the full board. So there's, and most generally, there might be a little email going back and forth, but a lot of ours are done, working groups will kind of separate out on Sunday afternoon before a meeting and have a chance to visit face-to-face and pound out a few things. So that's kind of what you're looking at.
Okay.
By being on one of those working groups. Okay, the next one would be a financial working group, and we have Callie and Paul Durbin, who's been off actually for 2 years now. Fred expressed an interest in that. Rick?
Financial?
Financial?
Yeah, I will too.
Okay. Okay, the public comment working group would be Julie again, June, and Tim. And
I do know that Fred expressed
okay,
concern or
that's-
desire to be on
and
that.
that will work well. Directors Challenge type efforts that support volunteer resources. Again, it was Paul Durbin, Julie, June, and Tim. June and Tim are doing a lot of stuff.
Boy, we're just,
No, I'm not on that one.
I
I'm not,
know I was even.
And that's one is probably a little bit inactive
yeah.
currently. But
What was that again? That I'm supposed to be on?
that was a Directors Challenge.
Yeah, I'm not
Efforts.
on that committee.
I don't.
Oh, you're
I don't-
not on that
I'm not
one?
even sure what that was.
Oh, excuse me. Maybe I put you on that.
Yeah, you
Right,
might have tried.
Okay.
I
Would-
thi-
Do we want to populate that, or do we just go ahead and have leave the group sitting there as the needs arise, have someone get on there? How do you want to do that?
I guess, as I read that, and knowing the Director's Challenge was kind of a thing of the past at this point, but the key part to me is that support volunteer resources. So I think, isn't that the one where, working to try to get volunteers, either financial or actual labor to
Yeah.
help BLM?
I think the
Was it-
the whole volunteerism thing is a really, it's a direction that the BLM has stated they really want to go in, that they want to try to do something about. So I think that it's, at least, I think at the very least, we should populate it
Okay.
so that it's there if they decide they want to use it, and, because otherwise, it would take another meeting and another recommendation to create the committee. If the committees, my feeling is, I know there's a lot of committee stuff here, and my name pops up in a bunch of places, but I can say that I don't get called on hardly at all for any of these, but when they're needed, it's nice to have that group there.
So I was correct in putting your name on that. The other thing I would,
Evidently you were.
and I think what we should do is shorten that officially to be just support volunteer resources.
Yeah, just
That's
support
fine.
volunteer resources. So that would be the,
And now I remember I did want to be on that group because I would like to promote more financial support.
well, I mean, you're a perfect example of somebody who supports and does volunteer stuff
Right.
for these horses, so.
I thought it was just because you wanted to work with Tim.
Of course. It's just an added,
Okay, we've got two. If there's a third one that'd like to jump on, otherwise we can leave with two.
who's on it besides me?
10.
It's too bad we live a whole country apart.
Yeah, that's okay. The telephones, it's just a,
Would you like to jump in on?
Well, I just left the Serve Idaho Commission, so that'll work for substitute.
Okay, then we'll put
Good.
Cope on.
Good.
all right.
Okay, population growth suppression. Currently, it was myself, Dr. Bray, and Jen Stephenson, who are both off. Dr. McDonald
Yes.
said that she would like
serve on that.
to be on
I
that.
think that makes sense for me also.
I think it would. Okay, so.
Yeah, well, I'm listed on there. I will be happy with the
Oh, you are
experts,
in.
3 experts. I'll back off of that one, because if you've got Dr. McConnell and Dr. Cope that want to sit on that with you, that to me seems to be a way more appropriate selection.
Okay,
I'm a layman in that respect, so. The idea guy, though, you gotta admit.
okay, we talked
We'll
about
call you for
tourism.
ideas.
Okay, and lastly was a National Wild Horse and Burro Advisory Board's standard operating procedures. I'm not sure we need to populate that because we probably need to today, to be timely, if we're going to make any discussions or recommendations to that SOP, I think it needs to be done today, and therefore maybe eliminate the need for that working group. Is everybody comfortable with that?
So that's probably an issue that all of us should be involved in anyway, truthfully.
Okay, and the last one is the resources working group. Myself, John Fallon, Rick Danver, Jim Stephenson, who will be off. Callie, I think, Dr. Cope, because you're the
Right.
represent the natural resources, I think it would be a natural fit for you.
Agreed.
Okay, with that, we can go down that same list now that we've repopulated them and see if anybody has, discussion to be made on any of those groups. Go ahead.
I just was noticing here on the resources one that the POC person is to be determined. Is there any chance we would know who that would be? Who would be our helper person from BLM?
We'll have to think about that, I guess.
Okay.
We can get back shortly.
Okay.
In those expedited responses that that we've talked about, sending back out, that would be a good place to
Okay,
maybe let
thank
us
you.
know.
I'd like to confer with Joan before.
Sure. That'll work.
And can I just ask for, on the response, when we get the response from the BLM, approving whatever, on the contact person, on that, we usually get an email with some kind of a response of, within 30 days. Could we have the contact information for each one of the points of contact listed on that? Like, each of the, and if just, it would be easier just to have it at my fingertips to know people in the committee that if I need whoever the point of contact is, I don't have to go
So a
searching.
revised list with all the changes here, come back with our
Yeah.
response to the recommendations.
If you put the contact information for the BLM point of contact with each subcommittee on the response, it would just be helpful to me.
Okay?
Thanks.
Okay, I think maybe at this point, maybe as a springboard to go through board concerns and discussions, what I think maybe we should do to be organized, we should go down through these committees and to give us at least a realm of issues to start our, discussions, and then we'll kind of open it up to each person having something other than what might fit these working groups. Sound fair?
Yep.
Boyd, can I go back to what Tim said to make sure I understood what his comment was? Are you
sorry.
asking for a comment person on each recommendation's
Well, we have a
response?
point of contact of each one of the
Committees, yes.
committees. And all I'm asking to do is just a thing of, like where Debbie Collins is there, can just stick her email address or something when you guys get back to us. All I want is
Their
the,
email address and phone numbers, all you want.
yeah, that's all I
Okay,
want. Just
got
a
it.
way to,
Thank you.
like, on the committees I'm on, if I want to get a hold of my point of contact, so I don't have to go searching through the website trying to find it.
Got it? Thank
That's
you.
all. It's a clerical thing, that's all.
Okay. Yes.
Is this working? Yeah, as we transition, especially for the sake of the folks on live stream, I just want to remind the board members to have your microphones close enough so that most of you are good, but a couple of you were having a hard time hearing.
Okay, we will be cognizant of that. Okay, Callie, do you have anything from the financial working group that you would like to discuss at this point?
I've spent so much time on the other two issues that I haven't gotten a lot on this one. I guess one of the things that I would like, I guess Joan did go over it, but somehow in our agenda, if we could always be sure that we have the budget as an item in the agendas in the future, because it really, it wasn't noted in here. I guess Joan covered it eventually on an update. But I know in the past, we've went over it in quite a bit greater detail.
I know in my packet, I didn't have the 2014 pie chart at all, so maybe we should make it more specific request for that,
Yeah.
a spot on the agenda for that.
I really
Under the
do,
pro-
because I guess, I mean, we know that that's a driving force of anything and everything BLM does, is, what they can or what they can't do. So I think that that is something that is very much needed and in the forefront of what our conversations are. And I'm looking for mine right now, so excuse me.
So
just
that
a minute.
possibly could be a basis for a recommendation, a short
Yeah.
recommendation.
So are you wanting recommendations right now, or you just want
No, I'm just
discussion?
saying that with your report, that, I'm
Okay.
just noting that, to
Okay.
come back to it, that could be a recommendation.
I guess, and as I alluded to before, I do have the concern that with the financials, where the priorities are within the program, and how effective and useful this board is, for one thing. Is BLM getting a real value out of having the board, rather than just, at times it feels like we're just meeting and we make our recommendations and it doesn't get too far. So I guess I'm not saying that we don't, I believe that there is a need and a value for the board, but I want BLM to make a commitment to that, and that the recommendations that come from the board will be considered pretty strong. I mean, I know they're just recommendations, but that they are considered.
Okay? Any other comments on the financial side of things?
I can't find it right
Concerns?
now, so I guess not.
Okay, you'll bring it up later if it's, okay. Okay, let's go to the public comment working group.
Well, June and I have both spent quite a bit of time. I know she's got some very good thoughts and points on some of the comments.
Well, it's too bad that there are not more people here that made comments today, so that, they can
June?
some of our responses.
June, we can't hear you, darling.
That's because my machine's not on.
There it is.
I didn't know I was supposed to push the button. Anyway, I guess one of the things that I saw in what our responsibilities might be is to help those who are making comments for them to be easier for their comments to be recognized. It really is, it's really not the best to start out with negative, so maybe there have been mistakes made in the past. Things could have been done different, but that is the past. And let's just focus on what might be able to be done in the future or right now. Excuse me. We talked earlier about forming community groups and those kinds of things. And if, those volunteers out there would really like to be a part of that, then they do need to have a positive attitude. They need to have an open mind so that there can be give and take on both sides. I believe, that the BLM should do the same thing. I always kind of think of a thing that I had when I had a horse. When I got her, she was not a young horse. She had been broke to ride, but just about nothing else. And she was very big, and I'm not very big. Excuse me. And I'm also not a horse trainer. So we had to learn to compromise when, when we were able to get each other's trust, then we were able to work together. Sometimes we did things her way, sometimes we did things my way, but we got along just fine for over 20 years. Maybe we need to look at that kind of a thing more often than just being negative. I think all of us here on this on this board, we don't just come to 2 meetings 2 days a year, 2 meetings, whatever. Anyway, we do spend other times doing things, and I really resent the fact that some people attacked us more or less because they don't think we're doing what they would want us to do. But we have to look at the bigger picture, and I think it would be helpful if more people would look at the bigger picture. You can't just say we need to stop roundups. You have to look at what that's going to create, or you have to, or some of them say, let's turn all the horses back out. It's the Bureau of Land Management, and that's what they're supposed to be doing. And I think all of us need to be looking at the land as the best or the only resource that not only horses, but other uses have at the same time. Even though some people may feel, well, they do feel, very passionate about their particular thing, but they have to realize that not everybody thinks exactly as they do, and they need to take each other's needs or wants or whatever into consideration. I would just hope that those making comments could be, and some of them are very complimentary, very positive, but if more people want their comments or their recommendations or whatever taken seriously, they need to make sure that they're presented in a more positive and just positive way.
Civil.
Yeah, civil. That's a good word for it. Yeah, civil.
If I could, Tim, I know you want to comment on, or have discussion on the public comment.
I'm sorry?
I know you want to discuss, more about the public comments and how you want to approach that, but I think this is a good segue. I know Dean had an interest in maybe addressing some confusing points that came in yesterday during public comment, and now would be a good opportunity for you to address a few of those, if you would.
Okay, there was only one issue that I wanted to provide some clarity from a BLM standpoint for, and that was because a couple of board members approached me after public comment and said, what really did happen? And it was in regards to BLM's gather of horses in Wyoming. The report was 41 horses were removed by BLM in Wyoming from public lands. So I just want to provide clarity, and I'm not suggesting that the commenter intended to not represent the facts, because I think they were, but since some ask about clarity, what happened, I'm going to provide the facts. There were animals near Grable, Wyoming, horses there were animals that were unclaimed horses that originated from private lands. These animals were not controlled in the 1980s, and they located on public lands. The area that they located on was not a herd management area, and it was not a herd area. It was across the highway from a herd area. The highway is fenced. So the animals were unauthorized, unclaimed livestock in trespass on public lands. BLM gathered and removed them under our trespass and impoundment regulations. And in accordance with the Wyoming state estray laws, they were turned over to the Wyoming State Livestock Board that subsequently sold the horses. So I had a conversation with a commenter just before the meeting convened this afternoon, and the ask, I think, from the commenter was that BLM be more transparent when these situations occur and come up, and that if the animals are to be sold at public auction, that people know about it and have the opportunity to participate. BLM did not sell the horses. It was a Wyoming State Livestock Board that did. So the people that ask questions, does that clarify what happened there?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Dean.
You're welcome. And I had one other thing that I wanted to provide. There was a whole lot of discussion about genetic diversity, and I added some comments to help clarify what I intended to say yesterday. But Tim, you were asking, and I don't think you really got a straight answer about what the deal was in the NAS report about Spanish herds and
Right.
genetic diversity. One of the staff sent me some quotations out of the NAS report, and the committee recognized that genetic management of some HMAs is complicated by other considerations. And those some HMAs were the Surbit Mountain herd, Pryor Mountain, and Sulphur herd, and then another herd, the Kigers, that have some unique morphological traits. But what NAS said about that in our efforts and concerns about preserving the Spanish characteristics, it said the BLM will need to balance concerns about maintaining breed ancestry with the need to maintain genetic diversity. So there's recognition that these are small-numbered herds, and we talked about genetic drift and decreasing
Right.
genetic diversity. So we don't really want to manage these as part of the meta population because these are some special genetics. But there's recognition there that we need to be careful and monitor carefully. So
Right.
that's what NAS said about that. Thanks.
Well, that's
all
what
I
my
have.
recollection was, just that they had specifically earmarked those herds for some type of consideration, so thanks for bringing clarity to that, I appreciate it. The other, are you all done?
I'm finished, thank you.
Okay. You know, to add just to what June was saying, I think overall, we had a huge amount of written commentary that we went through, and we read every one of them. And an awful lot of them were written by people that were quite angry, and a lot of it is venting. And I understand that, and I think that one of the important values of this board here, and it's not something that can be assigned a dollar value when you're looking at just the dollar value, but I think one of the important aspects of this board is a venue for the public to vent. And I think that's a valid reason to be here in a lot of respects. On the other hand, the most helpful commentary were people that even, and they weren't always complimentary, but were ones that would maybe point out an issue and also offer the possibility of assistance and also offer possibility of solutions. And those are going to be much more helpful than just somebody saying, "Dear horse killer, I hope you all die." And I'm a firm believer in you don't have to agree with everything that everybody stands for, and as well noticed as all the people sitting up here right now. None of us have the same approach to this issue. But one of the things we all do up here is that we treat each other very civilly. We respectful. We try to listen to each other's point of view, and God knows I don't agree with everybody up here. And I know that there's a lot of people who don't agree with me, but not one time has anybody ever treated me rudely, and I hope that I've never treated anybody else rudely up here. One of the things that I really struggle with in this process is when people treat me rudely or treat this board rudely, whether it be in writing or in person when they sit there at the table. My request to folks out there is I personally am doing my best, and as I think everybody else up here is that, and if you want, in your commentary, don't just focus on what's wrong. Let's try to also say, here's something we can do to fix this, and just don't point out the problems. I know if I did that with my horses, every time I went to get one of my horses, he'd get as far away from me as he could. So, think about when you sit down to write a letter, or when you sit down to make a comment, just think, if there was an issue I was having with my horse, how would I present it to him? There's a lot of distrust that's been created because of the conflict, and it would just be nice to see some of that mended. So I guess, like I said, that we got letters from like grazing associations. We got letters from individual stakeholders. There's all kinds of comment, and some of them are really helpful. One of the grazing organizations sent a really nice letter that were very critical of what's going on, but they said, perhaps you should look at this, this, and this as a possible solution to dealing with this stuff. And that was really helpful, and that's, you know, so we hope to be able to, we're trying to find our way through it. June and I spent a lot of time, what do we even say? There's too many to respond to individually. So what we're going to try to do in the future is try to categorize groups of letters, and there will be a vent pile, and we will read every one of them. But the odds of us responding to anything in the vent pile is probably going to be slim, unless they're done so in a civil manner. So I guess that's,
I guess
You could?
I guess I would say, you know, one other thing that they say, you know, do unto others as you would have them do to you. And I think that, you know, if you could look at comments that you make and then see how you would feel if it was presented in the same, if something was presented in the same manner to you, it might be helpful in you know, having your products better received, I guess.
yeah, I guess it's just that at times, a tone, the energy of a tone can override the value of the message.
Right.
And so I guess, you know, my point, I don't always feel civil towards everybody that I have to deal with. I've done a lot of conflict resolution in my life. And so what I try to do is I try to, when I find myself rising up inside with anger, is to try to drop that down and try to act as civil as I possibly can. And even though it's an act, what that does is when everybody acts civil, the energy, the civility eventually will bring the tone down so that people can hear what they have to say. So that's pretty much what I'm asking for.
And I heard one time somebody, excuse me, said, "You speak so loud, I can't hear what you're saying."
Yeah.
That's a good thought, Jim.
Jeanette, we should hang that, make a little placard, hang that right in front of Boyd. Well, thanks for the opportunity, and I want to thank everybody for their.
Yes, and we do
yeah.
appreciate that people do care.
Yeah,
We just need to care more collectively, I think, and more positively.
And the people that took the time to actually write down and send and get it into us, I actually, you know, when we brought this issue up, it was about, there was a gal, I can't remember who it was, but she repeated about 1 million times, "Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?" And, you know, this whole process started about forming this subcommittee was because of that gal.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as that at the time was kind of, we did listen to it. And we have, June and I have read every single thing that's submitted in writing. So keep the letters and cards coming, folks.
We can't diminish, you know, those who take the time to write a letter on paper or an email, but the commitment financially for people to come to, I mean, we see Ginger at every meeting, no matter where we're at, and, you know, that's a personal commitment, you know, to pay for the travel and time to be here, away from their jobs and other things that they do. So, you know, that's to be applauded from all sides, that people are willing to make that commitment to make a public comment on something they care about. Does that cover pretty much the public comment?
Yeah, it does, and
Okay.
thanks for the time. I know it was probably a little more time than you're counting on, but.
Okay, what about the support volunteer resources? Is there any discussion that we need to make on that working group?
I'm the newest member on that committee.
So you're going to report in, are you?
I want to just use that as a segue for something. There were some issues that went on in regards to donation by an organization of some windscreening out in Wyoming this winter. And I know that there's, I've actually seen all of the written thread from the time it was initially offered to the time it was turned down. And I'm just looking at it, I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to rehash that whole thing right now because it's not a timely process. But what it piqued in me was an interest of asking the BLM to establish some type of procedure protocol. And I've spoken to a couple of people in the BLM about it, and their initial response was a very positive one in this direction, of having some kind of a process that if somebody wants to volunteer time, materials, anything that's going to be an improvement on the horses or for these horses or the ability to take care of them, that there's a streamlined process for them to at least get that offer looked at quickly and answered quickly and answered politely and with a reasonable answer. And so, you know, that's going to be something I'm going to be bringing up in the recommendation phase for us to ask the BLM if they would consider doing. And I think, to me, something, a short form, you go to the BLM website, right there on the home page or something, some little click on it, you say, I want to help. What do you want to, what's your name? What do you want to do? Where do you want to do it? And that, and some really short form, easy, something to look at, and the BLM can look at that and say, is this something that we can work with or do something with or consider, and at least get back in a timely fashion, well, we can talk about it, or this isn't something we're interested in, but give them a short and sweet answer and get something going.
Okay.
Thanks.
I would, as part of that volunteer
Yeah.
thing as well, I would just like to encourage, do something that would encourage more people, you know, to do financial volunteer work. I mean, most of the time, I think when people think about volunteers, they think about people, you know, going out and doing compliance or, you know, helping in adoptions or things, physical things that people can do. But I think that, you know, there are groups, I'm sure, that do have financial means that can help in doing things. You know, I keep spouting our own organizations and the things that we do on a financial basis. We don't have membership that is, you know, right, like a club or something like that. Our members are all over the country. We even have one in Hawaii. But we're fortunate that we have the resources that we can make those monetary contributions, which I think are really as important or not more important than, you know, than the hands-on things. That they're important too. But I just would like to encourage more people to, like, and maybe through what you're talking about, that could be more readily available to them to do that.
Well, I spoke to a member in the BLM management and, about it, and the response was basically, sometimes even if the project is something, I'm paraphrasing, but even if it's not something that's terribly needed, if it's a vehicle that will create some cooperative venture and cooperative action between two groups that have been diverse, then there's a benefit to that. And I think that, you know, part of the reason that this offer that came in this winter was turned down, and indirectly, I don't know that, I'm not pointing fingers or anything, but I think part of the difficulty in that situation, it was coming from a group of folks that have, at times, are very adversarial with the BLM, and I think it's hard for them to maybe accept that because of that. You know, I don't know. That's not, you know, it's absolutely a factor in it. I'm sure it is. But, so I think that if there's a shorter form, and it maybe make the process a little easier, and keeps a short form basis or some kind for an evaluation, also keeps personalities and head bumping from being part of the initial decision on whether or not it's an option. So,
Well, another place that can work, particularly, and we heard a lot about how much resource damage is there really, and what do we know is out there. We have groups like the Backcountry Horsemen that could well be involved in monitoring efforts on a volunteer basis. And the other groups that are out there using the public lands, if we have groups like that that can offer information, the information's highly valuable. And we're in the process of self-training several of the ranchers for monitoring of stream bed and rangeland conditions, just because there's not enough federal manpower to do adequate monitoring. So if we can, anything we can include like that for people who have an interest in the issue, just for resource monitoring, could fill in some really large gaps and save a whole bunch of money too.
Sue and I talked to a young gal yesterday that was kind of in that same boat, who was collecting a lot of information on, you know, photographing a small herd, you know, getting some population stuff, getting some distribution stuff, habitat use information, but she couldn't figure out how she could put it to use. You know, she wasn't sure who to contact. That was the kind of impression I got.
yeah, she's done a lot of work, that young gal. Yeah, and really, and information, when I was working with the Chincoteague herd, there was a lady, her name was Naomi Belton, who took it on herself to go out and photograph every single horse in the herd, identify them, and when it came time to start managing that herd, she had a big book that already had photographs, both sides, front, rear, and it was so much easier to manage and start figuring out what to do with individuals in that herd because of her commitment. And she was actually probably the most instrumental person with turning around the management of that herd into a positive experience. And just, I'd like to identify the person I had to talk with in the BLM who's talked about that was Mr. Shoup. I didn't mention him before because I didn't want to put him on the spot without at least giving him a little advance notice, but he just let me know it's okay. He's the one who made the comment that it would be, that there's a value sometimes to projects, even though in the field they may not seem to be necessary at the time by somebody's opinion, that perhaps the opportunity to work together with a group that you've been at loggerheads in the past is more important. And I want to commend him. I was very moved by it when he told me, and that's why I wanted to share it with folks here in the audience. So there's some, I really feel that the group that made the offer this winter did so from what I've read, it was done in a pretty positive manner. But they do have a history of suing the BLM and being very aggressive with them. So it's, how do you get past that? And so, to me, it felt like there was a little bit of an olive branch extended, but, it's, I used the analogy earlier today with a situation similar to this. If somebody's correcting your behavior with a shock collar, after a while, you're afraid to move. If every time you move, somebody's pressing that button. The BLM is a little bit in that position right now because it doesn't matter what direction they're moving in, because it's not just the advocates that are suing them. It's grazing associations, it's ranchers, oil companies, gas companies. I mean, everything they do, somebody's suppressing the button. They're handing out an awful lot of buttons. And, it's, I can understand the homeostatic state that they're in to a certain degree. But maybe with some little bit of changes on the way. Who knows?
Rick, did you want to finish your comment?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off.
that was just.
I thought he was finished. I didn't.
I guess maybe the only other thing to add would be if there's any advice from BLM on how, whether it's something like Tim's proposing, or if advice for how a group who should they contact if they wanted to work with BLM?
Yeah, we need to look at that. It's something I want to look at when I get back because, I have no doubt, I have no doubt that this is true to some degree because I've experienced it in the past where you get an offer for help and you're so dang busy over here on this other thing. And what here comes somebody who wants to help on this particular area, and that takes time and energy away from this thing I've really got to get done over here.
Sure.
And right now, even though it's an offer for help, it's like, oh my God, that's, how am I going to even put attention on that? Because all my attention's over here. Well, what I know is you don't ever want to turn down help for crying out loud because in the long run it's a good thing. You want to encourage help, in my opinion. So we need to sit down, I think, sit down and figure out what process or what structure we want to put around that. June's had some ideas that she's thrown out, and I want to figure that out because I want to make sure that we don't want to put a suggestion box out and it never gets looked at. That would be the worst thing to do. So we want to figure something to do that's effective. So we need to
Makes
figure that
sense.
out. Yeah.
Callie?
So, a couple of comments, and I'm going to jump to the range monitoring one kind of to start with, because I absolutely agree that there is some real potential there. The one thing that because our conservation districts have been very involved the last few years in the Colorado Resource Monitoring Initiative process and working with people to do range monitoring, I think that it's extremely important that there are specific protocols that are followed, because what one person's idea of monitoring can be very different from another person's idea of monitoring. So I think that that's absolutely critical, and I'm sure that many states have a lot of what Colorado has, and that is there's a set of protocols that's been agreed upon by, I don't know, 15 or 20 different agencies, groups, organizations, individuals, but if you follow those protocols and it's verified by a third party, then it's used by the BLM, and I think that that's an extremely important piece that we use. And to follow up on that and the idea of offering help and so forth, and I'm fortunate enough to be in the Grand Junction area, like many people, I'm getting to hear more and more of these groups that are basically Friends of the Mustangs and so forth. So I think that there's some really positive things moving in that direction at the local level. I think there's still a lot of very negative stuff going on at the national level. And I guess I would just encourage anybody that's listening and that kind of thing is work at that local level. There are groups that have worked. The Friends of the Mustang in Grand Junction celebrated their 30th anniversary of an MOU with BLM. And they have, and again, it's a small herd. So these large herds, it's not going to be nearly as easy to do, but it's roughly 100, 150 horses, I think. But much of what you said, pictures taken, every horse is named by a vote at a monthly meeting, and they're very good, but they do the reseeding, they do fence building, they do water development, they did the bait trapping this year, and they make sure that every horse is adopted that's gathered. That's the kind of cooperation that can and does go on out there. So I extremely encourage that. Those that have money that are willing to support it, I really like the idea of the foundation. That sounds like you got, is that right, foundation? Is that what okay. So that concept, but I would not want to encourage or, for especially the advisory board to say to BLM, even if somebody has been, you're currently actively in a lawsuit with them, against them, and you continually get bad press from them, I don't know how we could ask BLM to actually say, yes, we'll take money from you just for the sake of it. I think that could be used against you down the road. So there's a fine line there of how you handle that, and I know you guys know that, and I appreciate that, and I want you to know that most of us, I think, recognize that. So, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not asking the BLM to do that, Callie. What I'm asking the BLM to do is set up a process just to speed up a response time for creating a channel that speeds up the response time for donations. And the part about missing an opportunity wasn't something my idea. That came from Mr. Shoup from the BLM. So I try not to sound too defensive here. I don't think it's our job to micromanage every little thing the BLM does, but I think that for us it's setting out maybe some trigger points and an outline for them to use as a launching platform for changes of direction in creating movement where there is now no movement. You can't have change in anything without movement. And, anybody who's ever tried to chain a mule knows that. So, the first thing you have to have is movement. And even if the movement isn't in the exact direction you want to go in, movement is positive. And at some point when you're at a stalemate, if somebody doesn't make the first move, and then if somebody doesn't have the courage and the leap of faith to make the second move, then you're never going to get anywhere. And it'd be like trying to play chess with all pawns on the board. So
I think it's called checkers, isn't it?
Yeah, there you go. But checkers, when you get a king, you can go in more than one direction. So, anyway, I just think that, like I said, I think what I'm going to come up with for a recommendation with the board, hopefully that we can, as a board rather, we can come up with a recommendation. It's going to be something really, really simple, and it's just going to be asking the BLM to consider creating a vehicle that. And the other thing is it may be a little more transparent. It's going to, I think, having something that's really transparent in the process, so that the question being asked is transparent, the offer is transparent, and the response is transparent. And then there's no question of the motivation behind it. Simple.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks.
Hallie, one of the things you talked about with range monitoring and standard protocols, I fully agree with that. That's why we're kind of running ours through the University Extension Office, and I think that would be present basically everywhere we're talking about the herd management areas are. If we can educate the people that are out there through the University Extension what the protocols are, how to measure, how to photograph, how to monitor out there, at that point the data become a lot more acceptable and a lot more standardized.
Okay, let's move on to the Population Growth Suppression Working Group, and I've been involved with that, and we've, basically, that was a very, over the last couple of meetings, or the last year for sure, that has been a very active group, and we made a number of recommendations, even down to the point of response to the NAS study with that. I think maybe a discussion I would like to bring up is to encourage BLM to follow through with that expedited research protocol on some of these alternative manipulations. Now, you know, we were concerned that, you know, okay, we're to the point that perhaps our injectables aren't working to the level we thought they may. But some of the other possibilities out there, I think the procedures have been verified. We have to prove, you know, they can be safely done on a field basis. And now whether that's a surgical intervention or whatever else, there are, what I see coming in from the possibilities from research, some of the initial proposals, or at least the discussion of those, is very encouraging. There are some neat things out there that will be minimally invasive and accomplish what we're looking for, would be a long-term decrease or inability to reproduce. So I think the potentials are really there, but I would really like to, from the perspective of that working group, is to encourage BLM to find some way. Let's not study it for 10 years. You know, I mean, once we prove that it is safe and feasible in a field situation, I think implementation and getting past that research point is really important. Whereas when we're starting with a new injectable product, you know, it takes time to find. You can't decide that it's going to work for 5 years with anything short than a 5-year study. So, you know, those are things that we know will be long-term studies. Whereas if, you know, we have a surgical procedure that is proven to be safe, or a manipulation that is proven to be safe, and it can be done in a field situation, then we should move ahead with that sort of situation.
I was going to buy a bag of marbles when I got home.
You got, okay, I got some cat eyes.
Marbles.
Yeah.
Marbles.
Marbles, sorry.
Hey, Boyd, as an aside, you know, I'm thinking I'd still like to stay involved with that group because of all the work I've done with you guys. I think as a fourth member, I think I'd still like to, because, you know, I've got those feelers out on the IUD issues and things like that, unless somebody wants to pick those balls up and run with it. Because I'm willing to put the...
Pick those marbles up?
Yeah. No pun intended. Sorry about that. That was a totally inadvertent pun. But just, you know, I thought about that. We had that conversation earlier about the IUD issues, and I've done a bunch of groundwork on that already. So I think unless you've got objections, I think
I
I'll
have no
stay
objection
involved.
whatsoever.
Okay.
I think every you know, thought and promotion on that is a good thing for that particular working group.
Yeah.
But I would like to, you know, a bright spot here is, you know, seeing some of those proposals and discussions of those proposals coming in.
Yeah.
Man, I'll tell you what, there's some neat things out there,
Yeah, there is.
and that will need a chance, and I think it could potentially put a lot of tools back at our disposal.
Well,
So,
as you know, I pretty much live outside the box.
okay,
And so,
okay.
I'm waiting to see if our research person over here joins the conversation.
And we have reproductive background there, so.
Well, I haven't seen any of the proposals. I've talked to people, colleagues who have lots of ideas, so,
Encourage them to actually make a solid proposal,
yeah.
because I think that's where our future is as far as the suppression issue is concerned, is, you know, and this board made a recommendation for ovariectomy. And because of the frustration of not having our other options working well. And there would be, you know, I personally feel that, you know, as someone who has spayed a lot of mares, that it could be done in the field with parameters and sideboards and protocols for it. But if there are things that are less invasive and are safe and can be done in the field, I think, you know, if those potentials are out there, then good deal. And that's.
So we're very, very anxious to see what comes in by May 7th and see what options we have and to evaluate those things. And that's not very far away.
No, it's not.
And
But,
I heard your
but
message.
just a few that I've been, you know, involved with the discussion on it, you know, it's very encouraging. You know, it's kind of exciting in a lot of ways.
Can we add a little side, or a little additional information from the Finance Committee? Because our only real recommendation is along the same lines, and it's just that we spent 1/10 of 1% doing field fertility work, you know, on this budget. It's every bit as important for us to start doing some things at a much larger scale now with what we've got, in my opinion anyway, and I think several other members' opinions, you know, than to just keep, you know, to put it all into research. You know, if we're increasing it at 6,000 to 8,000 horses a year, we need to try to bring that down some way. So I guess our, you know, comment from the Finance Committee would be to kind of make that a bigger line item on the budget.
And to support that point of view, I think that was a major recommendation from the NAS study. So, you know, it fits well with what's already been recommended by the scientific community. So I think those are well taken.
And I don't want to hammer it anymore, but I guess that's a lot of the frustration. Okay, so if you don't have any more holding capacity for horses, you stop gathering. But the fact that there's not even any gathering going on to do any fertility control becomes a big frustration. And I guess that's where I'm thinking that this part of the budget, I don't know where that money was diverted to. And maybe it was just diverted to holding, so you couldn't even do any kind of catch, treat, and release, or whatever the case may be. But again, focusing back on the resources, we've got to quit. We've got to do something to slow that population increase down. Whatever it takes, that's got to be a priority.
So I have a question for the board. You asked kind of where the money went, and normally when we do population growth suppression in the past, historically, for the most part, some removals have gone along with that. So we're faced with the dilemma of limited space, hardly any space, can't remove too many. So what is the board thinking that we should go out into HMAs that are over AML and treat even if we're not removing very many animals? So is that what you're suggesting? Change up the operation?
I have my opinions, but I'm interested in hearing what the rest of the board says.
Dean, I'd like to weigh in on that a little bit. I'd say yes, that is, in fact, I mean, to be paralyzed and not do anything because we cannot remove, I think it's foolish to say let's not have any manipulation at all. And that may mean, you know, in consideration, there are no numbers coming off. Then perhaps, you know, maybe we would actually treat more and manipulate more animals than you would normally. If you're going to remove a number and then you calculate in, okay, how many should we go ahead and treat? Maybe this means we have to be more liberal with the treatment.
I just wanted
to justify that gathering.
I just wanted to hear you say that out loud, and the goal is still to achieve AML. But maybe what you just said is step one before we do step two, before we do step three, and it's a progressive thing. Over time, we get to AML because what we used to do isn't possible at the current moment. Go in and remove and achieve low end of AML like that, at least according to the population estimates we had. We've learned those.
I think, Dean, you only do step one and stop there because you can't do step two. Because if you're gonna gather enough horses off of a HMA to sterilize a serious number of mares, and you don't have the resources to take the horses off the public land, then of course you can't do step two. So you gotta turn them back out. But at least you'll accomplish something in this period of time. My second question to you is, how much money do you have in the current budget to gather horses if it's only for treat and release these mares?
Currently, there's, I think, an annual work plan number of units for treated mares of about 450. That's currently what's there. So not very much.
But Dean,
450 horses?
Yeah, PCP, and that's mostly ground treatments through darting programs, for the most
That
part.
doesn't
Does
start-
not
Goes nowhere.
involve helicopter gathers.
We're wasting our time there, Dean.
Not necessarily in the program that's in the priors and several Colorado programs. We're not just treating a few, it's a substantial treatment. It's making a difference in those, and we've tried
It's
to
high percentage in the small allotments,
I get it. I
but it
understand.
is a minimal or very, isn't hardly worthwhile in an allotment where you got 3,000 horses.
We're not going in to treat 50 head in an allotment where there's 3,000
No,
horses.
but you said 400 head at the max, that's total of everything.
That's total.
So that doesn't cut it. There's no way in this budget that you had any money set aside for gathers. And following up on what Callie said, you must have some money set aside in 2013 that you didn't use for gathers. So where did that money go?
No, I don't think there was any money set aside for gathers in 13 that wasn't used.
It wasn't used?
We removed 4,300 horses, and I don't remember the treatments. It was about 500 in 13, but we didn't leave gather money on the table.
So what I'm hearing here, the bottom line of what I'm hearing here is, you're not only gonna not gather any horses to reduce the numbers on the range, but you're not gonna put us in a position, or you in a position, where you can sterilize some mares and stop the colts, mares from having babies, huh?
We haven't made a decision on removals this coming summer for the rest of the fiscal year. Greg, do you want to weigh in any?
We're working on that.
What's the difference between removals and gathering enough horses so you can spay them?
Well, there's two very different things. Removals commit us to holding costs.
You gotta gather them either
Actions-
way. You gotta gather them either way.
Well, you said, what's the difference?
Well, I know, but I mean, what's the difference? Because you gotta gather them either way. I know that if you're gonna remove them, you gotta remove them, but I haven't heard anybody say you're gonna remove any.
there was still money
You're saying
budgeted
the
in
cost of gathering is the same either way.
Cost to gather is the same either way.
That's true.
But you did have a category, one for gathering horses for fertility control, and one gather costs for removals. Could then that money for removals be carried over into larger gathers and treatment for fertility control? Is
It could be. It could be, and John is suggesting sterilizing mares, and we haven't established a procedure yet and proved it before we take it to the field.
So,
And we're kind of waiting for what comes in from the RFA, and you said you were very intrigued by some of the things you heard about. So that's kind of where we're at right at the moment.
so I guess, Dean, okay, so we are, what, better than halfway through fiscal year 14?
Yep, March is mid-year, March
Okay.
31st.
Okay, so we're halfway through fiscal year 14. And I guess as I'm hearing you say, we don't have spaying or sterilization abilities yet. You're gonna wait for proposals, potentially 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years before you're gonna let that go to the field?
No,
Where do we
I-
think that might be?
I don't think so, Callie. I think when we see those, there may be things we want to pick up and we want to do in pen trials, and that, not very long after that, go to the field with it, depending on how the pen trials go.
What do you refer to as not very long in pen trials?
We're
It
planning
depend-
pen trials and field trials for some of this stuff
Yes.
this year, right?
Yes.
So how much time does that take?
A pen trial? Well, I think it depends on what procedure we're talking about. If it's strictly ovariectomy, times to do ovariectomy or not into late pregnancy, probably the ideal time would be from July through November 15th, second trimester time, not first trimester, not third trimester when
So
they're
that's
heavily
gonna,
pregnant.
that's gonna use up this year. So you'll not be in a position, from what I'm hearing, to be able to do anything positive to keep mares from having colts next year, this year.
This summer, we could do some pen trials. And then the next step would be to do a field trial. That's what we have been contemplating.
You know what troubles me is they've been doing this, Boyd's been doing it himself for years, and so's Dr. Cope, for years. They've got all kinds of experience. I got veterinarians that work for us that cut horses for us and other people all the time, and spay mares for other people all the time. So I have a real problem with dealing with the mentality that we got to test all this stuff before we can go get the job done.
Well, there are some things to consider. I think spaying wild horse mares, ovariectomies, is a different thing than doing it on domestic mares. And we heard your recommendation to move out and get a procedure developed and do something in lieu of no other avenues or alternatives. That's what the board said.
And I don't
So-
want to face-to-face argue with you, although
Well, I
know
don't either,
am.
but I want to suggest that
But-
I don't think it's the cure-all, and I don't think it's a magic pill, as some have said. It may be a tool in the box, but these mares are pregnant. They're not open mares.
But I don't want them to get pregnant next year,
I understand.
this year for next year.
So I hear the board, that you want us to do something as soon as possible. And what I'm suggesting is we would like to see what comes in through the RFAs in a month and then go from there. Greg, do you want to add anything to this?
No.
Come on, be a sport, no.
Chicken.
I guess, and is what's going through, I think is what's going through all of our minds, and I know it's yours too, so, I mean, I recognize that. But here we sit, I'm just gonna throw a number out because everybody wants to disagree in numbers. Let's say 50,000 head of horses are on the range. Okay, by next year, that's 60,000. By the next year, that's 72,000. If we're looking at 72,000 head of horses on the range before we start doing any kind of sterilization or whatever, and we all recognize we can't sterilize or fertility control our way back to AML. That's not gonna happen. You can't make that happen when there's 50,000 head out there, let alone when there's 72,000 head out there. So we all know horses are gonna have to be removed off the range in order to get back to AML, in addition to fertility control. And so right now, I think as frustrating as it is to have to say, yes, if like I say, it's even really difficult to say. Fertility control, just because you can't gather, we can only do fertility control, but if that's all that we can do, let's get started doing it yesterday.
So,
I'll leave it at that.
very good. I appreciate what you're saying, and I generated some of those numbers that are on those
I know you
charts
have.
that show up if we don't do anything.
Yeah,
And this is all about conservation and habitat management and yet conserving our horses. So can we agree that we shouldn't rush to do something in the field until we have a safe and a humane procedure to do it, and that BLM should take the time, if in a pen trial, if it's an ovariectomy or whatever it is, that we should validate this as quickly as we can, and then move to the next step from there.
Well,
Please
Dean,
understand that
we
doing
got-
this with wild horse mares is different than domestic mares that walk into Boyd's clinic and are there for post-surgical care. We need to have procedures, and we need to know that we can do it safely and humanely.
I'll bet you got 2 veterinarians sitting here that can answer that question before dark tonight. Can
And,
tell you how to do that.
and I think they probably had confidence, at least one of them, that this can be done, or he wouldn't have supported the recommendation that the board made. So I hear what you're saying. There's urgency to move out, and please do something. That's what I hear what you guys saying.
Okay, so now I can jump in. I want to back him up. So I will say that for me personally, it frustrates me when I suspect that we are self-limiting what we're doing. And I try to be mindful of that and push back on that as much as I can. But I do want to reiterate what two messages from Dean that I want to reiterate. One is we get it, and we are interested in doing something as fast as we can, because believe me, Callie, we know the numbers, we know what's happening.
I know.
So we're very interested in moving as fast as we can. But John, the fact is that we have to be judicious and prudent in how we go about it, because we do have an obligation to do this in the best way that we can, so that the health and safety of the horses are primary.
And I'm just using Boyd and Dr.
we're happy to get input from these guys as
because
to,
they know how to do that. They're professionals, both of them, and there's a whole lot more people out there just like them.
and I'm looking forward to hearing from guys like this to how we can do it. Now I'm okay with the concept. I buy into the concept that there's a difference between a domestic horse and a domestic situation and the wild horse that we're bringing in. And we're just in the position that we're in is we just want to be relatively sure that what we're doing and the way that we're doing it is okay. And then once we know that, then we need to move. But first we just want to do a little bit of due diligence to make sure that we're pretty confident that what we're going to be doing is going to be okay. That it's going to work and the horses are going to be okay.
And I guess what frustrates me with your line of thinking is that we've been talking about this issue for the last several years. How come we don't have it done by now?
I think that's a good question.
I think, could I jump in for just a sec here? I agree that the BLM cannot be doing something and go out there on a limb that's going to be imprudent and have it blow up in our faces. It has to be proven safe. The good news is we don't have to do a 5-year trial to prove that it lasts for 5 years. You know, the proof should be relatively, found out relatively quickly in the fact that we have to prove that it's safe, can be done, and it's humane, and there's some aftercare and this or that or whatever for that particular procedure. And that's going to be much easier and much quicker than it would be to prove the efficacy of something over a long period of time. So that's the good side of what's coming up.
One of the things that I'll say last summer when we were talking about this general topic, there's the idea of the, you got pen trial, then field trial, and there was this concept that the trials were all like over here, and there was some conscious discussion, as I recall, that those field trials, they need to be like out there, so that the field trials, the field trials need to be part of the study, not you study it in the sandbox until you're satisfied, and then you take it outside the sandbox. The idea that we were talking about is, okay, the pen trial's a sandbox, but when you're doing field trials, that's out of the sandbox and out there, so that the field trials are contributing to the solution. So, you know, we're looking for ways to make sure that things are going faster than, and it's not in, forgive me for the reference, but it's not in some research ivory tower over here, you know, for several years, and then we roll it out.
That was my frustration too, Greg, was just the idea that, I mean, if we do have, you know, maybe we're not, you know, totally satisfied with PCP, but the, you know, if we could do the field trials at 4,000 doses instead of 400 doses, it seems like we're making a, you know, a bigger dent. We're slowing that rate of increase a little bit. And I think that's what everybody's, I think we're just going to feel so much better when we say, you know, we can control these if we need to. Because the minute you know you can control them, now we can manipulate. We can let them grow here. We can shrink them down there. I guess I just had visions of a larger scale field trial / management action, you know, for this year.
And slowing that reproductive rate, I think it's something that's going to be accepted by all sides of this, is if we slow down the rate of increase, therefore we slow down the need for removals, the need for a lot of other things. Now, we need to talk about coming down from, you know, at least toward AML on this first, but I think a lot of people can buy into the fact, okay, if we aren't having as many foals hit the ground, we don't have to manipulate, and I think that would be viewed as a good thing from a lot of perspectives out in the public. So,
Just to get back to your thing
Sure.
about having expected a higher volume in the trials, I think actually what you should expect is that we're going to be very prudent to start with, including an initial field trial. What I would expect to see is that once we get an idea, okay, yeah, that works, then it's a steeper curve as opposed to going up too fast, because we don't want to, you know, for example, we don't do a pen trial and then the first field trial we do is, I don't know, you know, thousands of animals, and then it's an oops. Yeah, that didn't work. That was a bloody mess. You know, we don't want to do that.
but Greg, I think the only downside would be is it may not be as efficient, or, you know, it may not be as good as we think it should be. That would be the downside. They've already proven the safety, so we shouldn't expect a negative result based on that side of it.
You know, one of the comments that was repeated more than once in the public commentary was, why isn't the BLM using more PZP when PZP has had some effect? NAS study referred to it as well. And I got to back Callie up on the comment she made, or the request she had a few minutes ago. If the BLM isn't going to gather for removals, why can't the money that would have been utilized for that be used to gather? And even if it meant going to, you know, some of these, maybe some of the herd management areas where the population is more critical than others, and basically rounding up every single mare that you can and PZPing them. At least that'll cover a year to 2 years of greatly reduced growth rate. So I think that's what I understood was her first request, or her first question. That makes a lot of sense to me. If you can't remove, then you know what? Look at this. What's the opportunity here? The opportunity is to still gather, if a removal, if you were going to gather 4,000 horses, then let's gather 4,000 horses and use fertility control.
One thing, go ahead.
It depends on the herd management area. It depends on the herd.
No, I understand that.
Because some of those herds, if we gather them up once and treat them, we'll never find them again. So so the idea would be, in some cases we want to touch them once, and we know they're done. So it just kind of depends.
Yeah, I
Now,
understand.
that doesn't mean that there aren't places where we shouldn't be looking at that.
Right.
That we
I'm
couldn't
not
do that.
saying this is all the way around, but I think there's areas that this could be an approach, because you don't have enough to go and gather every horse out there. But maybe there's that's what I was saying, there's some select areas where this would be an appropriate thing to do, and that maybe this is an opportunity, since you're not going to gather and remove, that the efforts can be put into, because one of the things, when you look at how many horses there are out there and the amount of mares that are actually treated every year is really small. And one of the things in the public comments is, well, how can you expect such a small percentage of the horses being treated to really have any grand effect? You know, good point.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess I have one question. My machine on. When you're talking about, trials, tests and everything, what about all of the other that have been going on before? Pauls Valley, Carson City, where they've been doing testing for, 3 years or more. Where has that information gone, or has it been used at all, or is it just a waste?
That was the information that I shared during the research report, and perhaps some of my slides or my communication didn't really drive home the points, but June, we started a second trial on spayback because it does look promising, and maybe after the meeting I could show you some paper and some numbers and things that would help with that.
Well, and I guess I understand that, but has it been used? That's my question.
It has not gone to the field, but part of USGS's, our next step with some more data would be go to the field, or we take it to the field with what we know now, knowing that it's the most effective vaccine we have, better than anything we have, but we got to make the decision when it's time to go, I guess.
And I guess
to a field trial.
when we're talking about, maybe what I'm not understanding is that, these trials for PCP, for spayback, whatever, have been going on for over 3 years. So is that kind of what we might be looking at in regards to these other things? Even though, you're saying you're going to do it as quickly as possible, that's just relative.
I think it depends on what the technique is. Somebody's proposing a new vaccine, we have no clue if it works or not.
Sure, and I
Somebody-
understand, and I do understand that. It's just, and I realize that technology is advancing all the time, and sometimes there is a waste of time and money put into something that is just going to be outdated in another year, but I just was curious.
But look, as Boyd said, when we've got the safety issue resolved, and the safety, it may not have the efficacy yet, but we definitely have the safety. I understand prudence and all that, but when the worst that can happen is nothing, and you weigh the cost of doing this versus the cost of more horses out there at $46,000 over their lifetime, I'm having trouble seeing the downside of moving ahead.
Well-
Bottom line, it looks to me like, we've got to move on from this discussion, I understand that. But the bottom line, as I see it right now, number one, they're not going to physically spay enough mares to make a difference. So, getting back to what Tim just said, which I totally disagree with, but it might be the only option we got, if we could take this extra money, if we've got any, and go ahead and gather areas where there's no trees, vast desert, so you can gather these horses again. You can select your areas where you can gather them more than once. And go to those areas and treat a bunch of mares. If you got to give them the shot that doesn't work, we'll do it.
Okay, looking at the time, we have an hour and 55 minutes before we have to clear out, is the understanding I have.
So anyway, can we just leave it like that?
I want to add some metrics for less than a minute, okay?
Sure.
There was a comment, what if we went out and treated 4,000 mares? Some metrics related to that are, if it's PZP, we should apply it in the fall, shortly before foaling, okay? Treating 4,000 mares means you need to gather 10,000 animals, because half of them are stallions and half of them are immature females, foals, weanlings, that are not suitable for treatment. So gathering up 10,000 animals means that that's at least $10 million. And I'm not suggesting this isn't a reason to do it. I just want to give you some reality on the metrics of this thing. And that means we get a whole bunch more helicopters than we have currently to go out and catch 10,000 horses in those 2 to 3 months before foaling, November, December, January, and then you're approaching heavy mares in foal. So no matter which thing we look at, there's complications, and I'm not saying these are roadblocks that we can't get through, but
But you
kind of
got
know the
4,000 less you're going to have next year.
Yep, and then we better go do it again.
And that's right, better do it
the
again.
next year. So we're all on the same page here, and I am not trying to be difficult or barriers. I just want clarity on what's involved here. And it
So
is,
before we move on, then, what's the possibility of doing that? You guys got any idea? Of gathering X number of horses, pick a figure, if it's 10,000, it's 10,000, and get them vaccinated. That's better than doing nothing, and going the mechanical route doesn't sound very appealing.
Well, maybe after the break, that could be worked into a recommendation from the board,
Okay.
as opposed to...
Let's take a break. We'll be back here in 10 minutes. Let's be here by a quarter after. And we'll conclude our discussions and start recommendations. Okay? Thank you.